Hey John, you seem to believe a lot of really weird shit. What is going on? Hey, what's up? It's John Sonmez from SimpleProgrammer.com. So I often get sort of asked that or indirectly asked that question and get a little bit of strange looks sometimes. And you may have sometimes seen a video that I've posted here that you've said, wow, that's kind of out there, bro. What's going on here? But I thought I'd do a video to talk a little bit about that today and about kind of this idea that I've really come to understand, which is that sometimes effective paradigms are just as effective as the actual truth. And so what I mean by this is that oftentimes we don't know the answer to certain things, certain questions about life, especially in regards to religion and spirituality and the nature of the universe and things like that. We have a lot of ideas, right? Especially in the philosophy area, how the human brain works, psychology, all of these things. We have some pretty good ideas, but we don't really know. In fact, a lot of people have conflicting ideas, and some of them are kind of out there, right? But this is the key, is that sometimes these paradigms, these models, and it really is, it's models, these models can work even though they might not quite be true and they might actually be totally out there, but the model itself works in order to achieve a result. So oftentimes, again, this might seem a little bit obscure. So what are you talking about, John? Well, I'm going to give you a really extreme example, and hopefully I don't lose too many of you on this example, because I don't practice this quote religion, but I thought this is a good one, because this is kind of a crazy one, right? At least for a lot of people, right? Let's take like Scientology, for example, right? Now, this is a really kind of strange religion, right? It's about this whole idea that, you've got these, what is it, like Zetas and these, they're like, there's this alien overlord who like trapped these spirits or Zetas onto Earth, and you have to free them, and there's a lot of really weird stuff there. I don't pretend to know everything about Scientology, and for those of you that do, you might be offended, but hey, that's life. But anyway, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because Mr. L. Ron Hubbard, who kind of came up with this whole Scientology thing, he's got some pretty good advice in there. Actually, if you research it and you look at what Scientologists believe, aside from the kind of wacky stuff, it sort of kind of works in life. A lot of people could actually use that advice. In fact, that's why you see kind of big celebrities that are really successful, like Tom Cruise, embracing this to some degree and seeing success from it. Now, again, I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying that this is true. I'm just using this as an extreme example to show you how sometimes something that I believe is probably pretty false could actually be useful, because that paradigm or that model actually works, even though we don't know why it works, and even though it may be completely off base, it may be not true at all. And you see this a lot of times in science as well. In fact, all of science, to get more to a practical level, is essentially based off of this, right? So if you look at, like, let's say an atom, right? If you draw an atom, you kind of draw that whole, the proton, and then you've got the electrons spinning around there, and the neutron in the center. You've got the nucleus and then the electrons, and that's kind of how we draw it. But that's a model that's not actually accurate, right? Because that's not how an atom actually looks. It's just sort of how we've been able to work with. In fact, all of our physics and the law of gravity and all these we've got a quantum model of the universe, like the quantum physics, and we've got a Newtonian model, right? And those are both still models. They're not quite correct. If you've heard of kind of this unified field theory, or the idea of string theory, or something to unify those, it's basically this idea of unifying these two models together in order to come up with a better model that's still not quite truth, still not quite accurate, but will serve us better. But when you think about it this way, right, we know that the Newtonian model is not correct, and we know that the quantum model is not correct. And the reason why we know that they're not absolute truths, that we know that they're not correct, is because they don't work together. And in order for something to be correct, it's going to have to work together. It's going to have to work at the quantum level, at the smallest scale of particle interaction, and it's going to have to work at the biggest scale of of planetary interaction and whatnot. Yet, even though we know that both of those things are not actually true, those models are accurate enough that we can send a probe to the moon and to Mars and do a Mars landing, that we could send astronauts to the moon and do a moon landing, that we can do a lot of really interesting things at the molecular level using quantum physics that seem almost impossible. So even though those models are not true, and we know that they're not true, they still are effective. And that's kind of the key, and that's where I'm getting with at this, is it still has so much accuracy that it allows us to operate. In fact, everything that we need to do really in this world, we have to have some kind of model. We don't always have access to the absolute truth. And so this is where, it kind of, for those of you, and this is the reason why I'm saying this is because I am a programmer, right? At heart, I'm a very analytical person. I'm a very, I would say, in my head more so than here, although that's changed, in the last few years. But I'm very logical and I'm very skeptical. And so a lot of the kind of stuff that I kind of read or kind of talk about or maybe believe to some degree now, it is something that is very out there for my mind, for something that I would have thought myself to be pretty crazy had I been talking about this stuff 5 years ago, or someone else had talked to me about this stuff 5, maybe 10 years ago. But since then, I've sort of discovered this idea of these models, and I've realized that I don't have to understand. I recommend this book called Think and Grow Rich. I still recommend this book. This is a weird ass book, right? I mean, when you read this book, you're going to be like, what the heck? Are you serious? Like, Think and Grow, like, you actually come up with this idea, you put it in your head that something's going to happen, kind of law of attraction, and you keep on reciting it and you keep on saying it with force and you believe this thing, and then all of a sudden magic happens and it works. Well, you know what? The thing is, I've talked to a lot of multi-millionaires and some pretty close to billionaires and really successful people in all areas of life, and they keep recommending this dang book, right? So what is the deal? Why do people recommend this book so much? It seems like this stuff is kind of crazy. And what it comes back down to is it doesn't matter if it's true or not necessarily, right? What it matters is that model true. So for example, this idea of the kind of things that the author of this book tells us to do, or the law of attraction, right? Those things might not be exactly true the way that they're laid out in that book. But for some reason, following that model, that model in our lives actually works to produce results. And I can attest to it, right? I mean, I know that law of attraction type of things absolutely work because I've seen it happen too many times in my life, too many times in other people's lives, and my life has totally changed since I started, going down that road. There's a lot of other things like that. I think, I find in a lot of religions. I don't know with 100% certainty, on certain religious views, if they're correct or not, right? None of us can know that, right? We hold our views, and that's good to hold our views, but it doesn't mean that we don't look outside to see what other kind of models exist and how they could affect our life. For example, a lot of the Eastern model, right? A lot of Buddhist kind of model and even some Hindu type of models of religion I've studied recently, and those really actually are very effective in a lot of ways in our lives, right? We can gain a lot from it. We don't have to say this is true, right? But we can say, okay, this model works. Why does this work? I don't even have to know. I just have to know that if I'm following this model, I'm going to achieve good results. So again, this is, a little deep here, but I just want you to understand this idea that, a lot of people are looking for truths that don't even exist out there in the mathematical or the scientific sense. Almost all of science is essentially based on models. There's very few things that we actually really know, to the deepest degree that we can call it an absolute truth. Especially when you get into philosophy and when you get into religion and all these things, and psychology especially, right? There's so much in psychology that all of psychology is based on models, right? If you think about it again, right, the way that, Sigmund Freud had a model, right? And his model it works, right? It doesn't work perfectly. There's some flaws in it, making everyone's problems be essentially sexual in nature. There's some problems with that. Carl Jung, he also had a model that actually works. Jungian philosophy, or Jungian, however you say it. I read it instead of say it. So I have like a few words like that where I read the thing, and so I don't actually know the pronunciation. But anyway, it doesn't matter. There's models, right? There's a lot of different models that work. These models that we follow, and that's how we achieve results. And the better the model, usually the better results that we find. And the more truthful, the closer to reality that the model is, usually the better it is. But not always. Sometimes you can have models that are totally out there, and for whatever reason, they end up working and end up being functional. So, in summary, this is what I'm saying. Don't just throw stuff out. It's one thing to seek the truth, but it's another thing to understand that in very few areas of life, in the world, and everything, are we going to be able to find absolute truth that we can 100% rely on. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't gain wisdom from models that are not truth. If we said in science, oh, I'm not going to accept anything that is not 100% proven, that doesn't make 100% sense, that's not 100% accurate, then we'd have to throw out Newtonian physics, and we'd have to throw out quantum physics. And I know some of you are going to argue about that and say, no, it does actually work together. No, it doesn't. I'm sorry, but it doesn't really, right? And even if it did, it doesn't matter, because how many times has different models changed in as we gain more understanding and more accuracy? It only matters that the model is accurate for what we're trying to achieve at this point. So all I'm saying is basically, don't throw stuff out and say, well, because this is truth, it doesn't contain wisdom. Wisdom and truth are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? You can, or they don't necessarily have to go together all the time. Sometimes they could be exclusive. Sometimes they can be a little bit further apart. And sometimes you need to look at the actual model, and you can garner some wisdom from that, and realize that almost everything that we're interacting with in life is some kind of a model. There's very few things. I mean, even your sense, you have a mental model, right? All of our senses, what you think is reality right now, maybe it's not, right? We only have the five senses. At least, we'll say we have the five senses, right? The five senses that we know of, everything is filtered through that and then through a brain. And so, what is an apple really red? I don't know. I can't know for sure, because, my eyes show me it. My ears let me hear someone telling me that is true, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. It's still a model. It's probably accurate. It's probably close to the truth, but it's a model. Everything is a model. And so you can learn from models if you're willing to. You have to expand your mind a little bit in order to do this. But when you find that, you're going to find that there's a lot of models that will work for you. In fact, just to go on one more riff, the whole dieting and working out and stuff, have you seen people that have totally different diet programs, totally different reasons for philosophies? One example is, right, I fast until 5 every day. You can watch a video on that. There's a couple of videos on that. But a lot of people do the bodybuilding diet. I used to do it. Eat like 6 or 7 meals a day. They can get similar results, right? Totally different model. They totally believe in totally different things, ways of working out, whether it be like low reps or high reps and volume. A lot of people vary that up and they still get results, but they have different models. So that's kind of, they're consistent within their own model, and what they're following somehow works. We don't understand exactly the mechanism that make the certain models work together, and you don't have to understand it in order for it to be effective. So again, judge things based on effectiveness, not based on what you think may or may not be the truth, because it's very, very hard to know what is the truth. What we're looking for is what's going to make us more effective in life, because that's what really matters in the end. It doesn't necessarily matter if our model is so accurate. So anyway, I hope you found this video useful. This is something that I've been thinking about for a while, and it's been percolating in there, because I'm trying to kind of make sense of there's a lot of things that I don't want to say believe, because it's not that necessarily belief, but I subscribe to, let's say, that are in conflict with each other, right? And I've had a hard time dealing with this. How can this be true and this be true? Well, these models that I operate in are effective in different contexts and situations. And by having multiple models, some of them overlapping, some of them conflicting, I'm able to manage a lot of areas of my life and have effectiveness that I wouldn't have if I didn't have these models. So, and your wisdom will grow as you're able to accept and incorporate more and more models in your life. Anyway, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, you can ask them below. I'll try to answer them. And if you like this video, subscribe to the channel. Talk to you next time. Take care.